Let you kind of dive in though and give a little intro to yourself and the brand.
Thank you for having me. I grew up in Laguna Beach. I was kind of a surfer and a creative in high school. I was really into kind of making movies and kind of design broadly, and thought I wanted to go into the film industry. I went to college in Boston, and I ended up studying undergraduate business. And instead of kind of pursuing something creative, which I actually regret in retrospect, but I graduated in 2010, right when the Silicon Valley startup scene was really starting to explode in San Francisco. And, I think I come from a pretty entrepreneurial family with kind of that spirit. And so I was, very much attracted to what was happening there instead of going to work at a corporate job. And so my first job out of college was a 3-person startup that was, building an influencer marketing platform for social media back in 2010.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of these experiences, which was like the right idea at the right time, just bad execution.
Okay.
It was early, but it was also I think we had an opportunity and poorly executed, which, was, I think, a very impactful experience for me because I think it taught me the lesson that like the idea is pretty meaningless. If you have a good idea, if you can't execute on it, it's worthless,
Sure.
right? And that everything kind of matters from the founding team to your investors to your go-to-market strategy in terms of validating a lot. And so I look back and that was very kind of impactful. From there, I joined another startup in the digital marketing space. That was a different type of experience. When I got there, were 15 people, and when I left, we were like over 500 people. And I had a bunch of different leadership roles in the company, and I was always one of these guys that was like trying to like push the company in a new direction. Right, I was the first to like focus on international. I was the first to focus on our mobile strategy. We were a desktop advertising company originally, and no one really knew what to do with me in these companies. And so I always knew like, I would be better off as an entrepreneur. And I decided to kind of leave and go out my own. But I was, smart enough, I think, to realize that, while I had worked in, traditional kind of B2B software development and sales, my passions and strengths were around kind of consumer experiences and things with like a creative bent to them. And so I sat on my own. Before recess, I spent some time exploring this hotel concept, which was like basically Soho House meets a high-end hostel targeted at like the kind of bi-coastal, nomadic WeWork crowd,
Oh, okay.
which was, I think, a good idea. It is a good idea, and you're starting to see a lot of it happen. But similarly, I decided like this was building it. Real estate development was not the the first startup or first space I wanted to really develop a startup for. And so I tabled that, moved to New York, and kind of the idea kind of recess, came from there, which I'm happy to kind of walk you through, the origin.
Yeah, definitely. Would you mind just kind of diving in? I'm very interested to hear. I didn't realize, I guess, you had all that experience, and then what made you then jump into recess? And then would you give a little background of what recess is?
Yeah. So I was, when I moved to New York, I joined 2 friends, in kind of were in the early days of starting this kind of brand studio, so to speak. We're going to like invest in startups and try and incubate our own. And there were already 2 other businesses that were kind of started, and I was brought on to come up with a new idea. And kind of what I observed was kind of CBD oil starting to kind of bubble up on the periphery. I saw it, added to like juice. I saw CBD oil at the, natural food store. And I've always been, a naturally stressed out and anxious and, wired person. And when I started using CBD oil, I felt better. I felt more balanced and even keeled. And as a result, I felt more productive, more creative, and less stressed out and anxious. And I just had a number of insights from that experience. The first being, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Stress and anxiety, were clearly, rising as issues that people were seeking solutions for. And I think it went from being something that was taboo to talk about to something almost quite the opposite, right? I always like to say, like, it would have been, 5 years ago to say I was seeing a therapist or I have an issue with anxiety would have been just
Oh, sure.
not something you talk about, and now it's completely changed, right? So I saw this like space emerging of products that help you relax, right, being a big opportunity. The second insight was around CBD itself. um, you know I basically, the user experience of putting CBD oil under your tongue was not a great one. But the way to think about CBD is as a compound, no more interesting than caffeine or whey protein, just a commoditized functional ingredient that would be added to many products. And the value would be developing the right application. So I could do a dissolvable tablet, I could do a oil, I could do kombucha, I could do a sparkling water. What was the best first product to do? And then most importantly, building the brand on top of the ingredient, right? And I
Okay.
always compare CBD to caffeine. Who are the biggest caffeine companies? It's Red Bull, it's Starbucks, right? It's
Hmm.
Monster Energy, and they don't market caffeine. They market Red Bull gives you wings, right? And there's
Yes.
this whole misperception around CBD. Everyone's like, I'm a CBD brand, and there's all these billion-dollar joint ventures between these cannabis groups and the big
R-
alcohol companies, and
Exactly. Yeah.
and I'm like, you're thinking about this the wrong way. No one cared. Like, it's a social construct that we're even talking about CBD, and it's
Okay.
because it was a controlled substance,
Hmm.
right? And so it created this kind of story around it, right? And it was that creates an interesting dynamic. When I came with the idea, I didn't know a single person that ever worked in the beverage industry, and or CPG, right? And it literally never crossed my mind to even think about.
Okay.
But what I observed was that beverage arguably has some of the largest brands on the planet, right? And it's the most brand-driven category on the planet due to the fact that beverages have a couple of unique attributes. There's no other product on the planet that's as high a frequency of use and purchase as a beverage. People that drink Coke or Starbucks or LaCroix or Red Bull tend to drink it multiple times per week.
Yeah.
And there's no other product that gets as much distribution as a beverage. So that's
Hmm.
a form of marketing for the idea itself, which leads to these massive brands. The thing I observed about, Red Bull and Monster and Gatorade is that they're effectively media companies that monetize through selling cans, right? In the
Ah,
case of
yeah. I
Red
mean,
Bull, it basically created a media company focused on the action sports community. It sponsored every athlete. It employed producers. And its business model was, selling cans, right? And
right.
that their marketing strategy was thinking, bigger than just the liquid in the can, right? In the case of Gatorade, they were focused on, a similar model focused on professional athletics. The opportunity I saw for Recess was to basically build, the Red Bull of CBD, but focused on creatives. And
Oh.
that, my overall framework is that, like, in the past, brands were built on the shelf. Today and in the future, they're going to be built on your phone, and that changes everything, right? I think the idea that you're going to like build a brand doing demos at a natural food store is over, right? And that it's all going to be kind of digitally first. And that, the opportunity I saw was to break through in a new way. And so I can come back to that. And the fourth insight was around the regulation of CBD, which at the time, CBD and various extracts of hemp were all controlled substances. And I recognized, I wasn't going to, start a business selling a controlled substance indefinitely. There would need to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And I heard about this piece of legislation called the Hemp Farming Act, which was introduced by Mitch McConnell. I'm
Yep.
like, why is Mitch McConnell introducing a bill around hemp and CBD? And it's fundamentally, it's a red state farmers issue. He basically wants hemp to be the future crop of America, so that all these farmers that used to grow corn, soybeans, tobacco, and have been hurt through globalization and broad commoditization, had a much higher yielding crop to grow. And so I heard that, I'm like, well, wait a second, those hemp farmers are going to ultimately want to sell to Coca-Cola,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And if I could basically create a business plan to navigate this regulatory kind of gray area to arrive at the other side, which is when the category really begins, as the category leading brand, will then, we have an opportunity to build Red Bull. And so from before I launched, like, my thesis was, there's a category forming that's going to be as big as energy drinks, focused on relaxation, with CBD and other functional ingredients serving as the base. and that we have, and that, Recess's business plan was to build the equivalent of Red Bull. And
Wow.
so that was kind of the thesis from day one. And, we're 19 months old now. And I think, we're still, small and young, but I think we're very well positioned to do just that.
That was a great intro. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I would love to kind of dive into some of those parts. I know for me, the piece that you just talked about with legislation, that's one that's I'm super curious to ask you about and to understand more. When I was looking into the CBD space, like I said, probably a year and a half ago, that to me felt like the biggest hurdle for sure. How did you think through that? And I guess my like big question would be like, how did you decide to go forward with Recess with the light at the end of the tunnel philosophy? And like, how have you thought through that as you've developed Recess? Because I think that's I'm sure that's probably scared some people away, and it's become I know it's a confusing component of the CBD space.
Well, it's just, I think it's a really good question. I've always viewed it as, a competitive advantage. I think so many of the biggest businesses were started because of some inflection point in either technology or regulation, right? If you look at Uber, it was, GPS on mobile, and it, like, the regulatory system wasn't designed for it, but it was
Right.
able to navigate that and like become out the leader. And so I think so often, like, you want to, in entrepreneurship, you want to find like a secret that people don't recognize the implications of. And then my secret was like, you know, people are talking about CBD, but I don't think they recognize how big it can get. And
Okay.
that, like,
Yeah.
if you view it as like the equivalent of caffeine to Red Bull, you're like, think about the market for caffeine and like how many experiences are built on the idea of stimulation. Like,
Yeah.
I really think there's going to be similar type of market built on the idea of relaxation, right? And so it was just so, like, I was like, this makes sense. This is going to happen. Like, farmers want as big of a market to sell, their CBD too. It's not just going to be oils. Don't make sense. Like,
Yeah.
oils are just like the first product out there because, it was primarily like farmers creating it, right?
Yeah.
It's not because it actually is like what the consumer wants,
Sure.
right?
It's
And
not a
so
great
to me,
experience. Doesn't
it
taste
was,
good.
yeah, so it was very
Yeah.
much a calculated risk,
Okay.
but like, I think you want to be like non-consensus and right, as
Sure.
like where value is created. And so, and I just knew, I also, that was one thing. I also had like this thesis around digital, which like, I'm astounded, like, to be honest, like, the more time I spend in the CPG industry, it's shocking at, I think, how, behind I think most brands are in thinking about digital. And I
Hmm.
think one of my observations is that, people in CPG think of digital as just like like, I can sell incremental cases through Amazon, and have
Yes.
completely ignored the brand building opportunities. And, the dynamics of CPG are such that, value is becoming one of the top, brands in a category, and nothing else really matters. You either want to
Hmm.
be really small or really big, right? To be honest, you don't, being in the middle is tough, right? And so to get big, it's all about becoming that kind of category defining default brand, like, RX bar, became in the time, right?
Yeah. Right.
And that, culture, and like, and I think to become that, you need to create a massive amount of awareness. You need to drive a massive amount of trial. You need to drive a massive amount of earned media. And that's going to happen. Is happening in Instagram, not like doing demos.
Yeah.
Like, and like, that's a tactic, but like, that is not brand building. Right.
Right.
And I think that, like, frankly, what a brand is fundamentally different today than in the past, right? In the past, when all a brand was a product that existed on a shelf, right? That was just a name on a package. It didn't stand for anything. And today, when your brand also has to exist digitally and has to be able to speak to consumers every single day, well, that fundamentally changes your brand architecture,
Hmm.
right? And so if you go to Recess, I don't know if you've been to our Instagram,
I have.
but like, it's so different compared to every single other CBG brand ever,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And that's very
That's
much
something I
by
want to talk
design.
about between your Instagram and your website. It's like almost like jaw dropping how much you guys have put into it. It's a very cool experience.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm happy to, dive into it. But yeah, like, I mean, look, I think a couple things as it relates to our strategy. So, We launched in October 2018, which was ended up being a month before the Hemp Farm Act passed. So the timing was like really good.
Oh yeah.
And we did this direct to consumer only launch. It was at the time, it was me in my apartment and my COO based in Boise, Idaho, is the only employees. Like there's nothing. And, our launch strategy was to, go out with this very polished brand, right? Like, it went from being, a CBD sparkling water to Recess. And the big
Yeah.
idea of Recess is ultimately like the idea of Recess itself, which is taking a moment throughout your day to reset and rebalance, right? And so we had to introduce this new idea into consumers' lives and establish a new usage occasion, establish a new feeling, right? And the way to do that is through telling your story digitally, right? And so our website day one is, when you go to our website, I think you get what we're doing. You get how Recess is meant to fit in your life. And that's not by just saying CBD reduces anxiety, which is what most brands do. It's by creating this entire brand world and this narrative around the idea of Recess being an antidote to modern times. We create products and experiences that help you feel calm, cool, collected, not tired, not wired.
Oh, I love
Importantly,
that.
our URL and our Instagram handle is take a recess, not drink recess, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
because I've never viewed Recess as a beverage company, right? I've
Oh,
really
okay.
viewed it as this new type of brand, right? And I think, one thing about, what the feeling, right? If you think about stimulation and energy drinks, I drink iced coffee in the morning. I'm not up until I have a sip. Like you feel an energy drink immediately. Stress and anxiety is a story you tell yourself in your head primarily, right? And so the, frankly, the effect is a combination of drinking recess. The effect of drinking recess is a combination of the efficacy of the functional ingredients and how they interact with us each individually. Like I always compare it to caffeine. Like my dad can have a double espresso at 11 p.m. and go to bed. I can't do that.
Got it.
CBD and adaptogens are going to also impact people differently. But it's also about like, what is your expectation about what Recess is supposed to do for them, right? Which is like how it makes them feel, right? And I think the best like beverage companies transfer an emotion, right, to consumers, right? They connect emotionally. Like think about Corona. That's, it's supposed to transfer you to the beach, drinking a Corona on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, Grey Goose. It's like you're balling out in the club. Think about, Red Bull. It's stimulation and action sports and being extreme. Think about Gatorade. It's like fitness, right? And so it's all the best brands are able to, really sell an emotion. And, what Recess is this idea of feeling kind of calm, balanced, and centered so you can be your most kind of productive and creative self. I think we didn't go out there, the usage occasion was not designed to be drinking, before bed, even though many people do it, right?
Yeah.
It's really meant to be drinking all day, which is, I think, why this is going to get so big.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
was say
so,
I'm
we
on like
really
my
do.
third LaCroix today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to your point, yeah.
So, so yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I mean that's it's an amazing like leeway into what you made you think of the brand, how to come to market. I would love to kind of go into, I think like the CBD space. One other question I had was, um, so you tried it, you had a good experience from it. I've had the same. It's like it definitely, especially if you get it from a good source, you definitely can feel it, you can notice it, you can tell there's something happening. How did you then, because you mentioned this at the beginning, how did you decide to get it into like a sparkling water drink? How did you decide that to be your first product?
Well, I just looked at like there's all these functional beverage categories, right? Energy drinks and coffee for stimulation, kombucha at the time for gut health, and you know, Gatorade for fitness recovery, and it just made sense. Like the only thing people pick up to like quote unquote take the edge off and relax is alcohol, right? But no
Mm-hmm.
one's going to drink alcohol during the day, and so it was just obvious to me that the world is getting more crazy, not less crazy, and people are going to be more stressed out, not less stressed out, and they're going to increasingly be looking for products and brands that help them relax,
Yeah.
right? And so, I just think no one's going to want to like carry around a tincture in their pocket all day and stick oil that tastes like grass under their tongue. They're going to want to drink something like a Recess, which is in the background, right? And it's similar to, where Red Bull fits into someone's life. And
Right.
so I just seem like an obvious opportunity to me. And look, people had tried the relaxation category before, but no one got it right. Right? CBD was not the main ingredient. The branding was all wrong. The timing was wrong. Like, and I think that's so much like such a lesson for, I think, entrepreneurship and startups, which is, you got to get everything right to have a chance,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, sure.
And timing and the name and the go to market, like a lot of stuff happened the right time. Like I always go back to, we originally were supposed to launch in, June 2018. We launched in October. I don't think we would have failed if we launched in June, but like I think it was like the timing was exactly right, and that was just a lot of luck, to be honest.
Right. And part of it's that,
And
right?
yeah, and I just think, going back to getting things right, I always would remember, when I was thinking about Recess, like looking at like Sweetgreen as a business, which was
Okay.
like Sweetgreen wasn't like the first salad chain. It was the first one to like really focus on every detail, and get, the brand, the ingredient, the menu, the digital all right.
Mm-hmm.
And that all compounds on itself and created clearly the market leader in the category. Right. And
Definitely.
so it's like just another example of, you can be just like in my first job out of college, like I was in influencer marketing in 2010.
Okay.
In theory, like you could, you know, you were early, you saw it before a lot of others did, and and that's not how it works, right? You have to like execute right across every stage.
Sure. Definitely. Yeah. And then like to bounce off of that, how did you, I know for me, like I've tried to put CBD like in drinks and it doesn't, well, I guess it depends on the type of CBD too. So that was a question I had for you. I know I read online, there's a difference between you
Yeah.
use full spectrum CBD versus CBD isolate. I think I've messed around with CBD isolate more. What is the like biggest difference and why do you guys use full
Yeah.
spectrum?
Well, I'll come to that. But your first point around, dissolving it in water.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, oil doesn't dissolve in water, right? So you
Right.
can't, CBD oil doesn't just naturally, uh,
It
is not naturally
separates, right?
soluble, right? And
Yeah.
so that was a big thing at the beginning. I was like, all right, well, how am I going to get CBD to dissolve in water? Right.
Right.
And so there was no supply at the time. It was much less sophisticated industry. There was no supply chain. I literally I can't remember how, but got connected to this guy that was operating out of what felt like a Breaking Bad lab in New Jersey, who had created this form of water soluble CBD. And that's not who he used, but like one thing led to another. I remember calling hemp farmers in Kentucky, like, who should we talk to about this? And we ended up finding someone. And over the past 2 years, the industry is completely transformed, right? Like there's a whole industry, the hemp industry now, and
Yeah.
like a lot of hard technology going into different products. So that's been amazing. But at the time, it was such a journey.
Oh,
And again, I had
sure.
no idea. I didn't know anything about making a beverage, right?
Right.
And the isolate versus full spectrum is a really interesting question because of the regulatory dimensions of the recess opportunity. It's almost like you're playing like 5-dimensional chess. Like you have to be thinking like many moves out,
Yeah.
right? And so what I saw is like doing the homework was basically CBD isolate has been approved as a pharmaceutical drug. So CBD isolate is just one compound, CBD, isolated within the broader hemp extract. Hemp extract is kind of all of the compounds found in hemp together. So you get CBD, CBN, CBG, and a bunch of other kind of terpenes as well, that work together. And those are distinct things. And the way it works is that you're not allowed, traditionally, to put something approved as a pharmaceutical drug into food or
Right.
supplements. And so I'm like, CBD isolate is not where you want to be. You want to be full spectrum hemp extract, and you basically want to be able to make the case in the short term while the regulatory gets worked out that, look, we're not a CBD company, we're a hemp extract company. And those are different things,
Oh,
right? And so
okay.
that's why it doesn't say CBD on our label anywhere on our brand, is because they're different things. And CBD is in recess, but it's one of many compounds found in recess.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Cause I was wondering, like, cause it's still kind of parts of it are gray, right? Just in general.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That makes so much more sense. So, okay. Full hemp extract. Got it. That makes sense. And then getting it. Yeah. Cause I know, it just seems like getting it into a drink, I'm sure was complicated at the time, especially at the time you were trying to do it. Obviously it's not like there was lots of that available. So,
Yeah.
but that seems like that's kind of just part of the entrepreneurial journey, is trying to figure that out, find it. It's like, it's no different
Well,
than, figuring all this out on your own in
well, that's where
general,
the
right?
value is created. It's like, it's like the dirt, right? Like it was
Sure.
not easy, right? And so, but we did, I think we navigated it the right way, right? And that's why it's potentially valuable. It's much easier to get into now because it's a much more mature, you know, the hemp industry is much more matured. So, compared to when I started Recess, there's 100 companies you'd call right now to get water soluble, hemp
Okay.
extract.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's just a different thing. But I'm incredibly engaged on the regulatory. I probably spend, no joke, 30% of my time
Oh,
trying to
really?
update the law. Yeah, I'm incredibly engaged there. And so, most CPG companies are not trying to, like, they're not spending a whole amount of time on politics,
Yeah.
right, in the first
Yeah.
year.
That's not,
Versus
yeah.
I've had to become one of the most engaged people in the entire industry on hemp, and specifically on the issue of getting CBD allowed to be added to beverages so they can be sold everywhere. Because that's where the real inflection point in our business comes, right? The only reason Recess is not at Target and Whole Foods and CVS and all those national retailers is not because they don't want it. It's because the regulatory is still unclear,
Right.
right? And so that's the main constraint in our business.
Hey, I was gonna say, I mean, you guys have really tackled the D2C component, and I know you're in, I think it was over 4,000 locations today. Is that right?
Some in that range. We're in 5 main markets. We're in New York, and we have a big business there. We're in LA. We're in Austin, Texas. We're in Chicago. We just launched Maine, and then those are our markets where we have DSD distribution. We also have a direct to business program where we had just shipped Recess to them at wholesale prices, because
Okay.
the economics make sense for us. And we get a huge amount of inbound demand from retailers all over the country that just want to carry Recess, but we don't have local distributor.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
Right.
that's a nice channel for us. And our D2C business is pretty distributed geographically. So, we're 19 months old.
Yeah.
This is I always like to say, it's very different creating a category versus going into an existing category and trying to differentiate and take market share. Two completely different business plans. And ours has been around this kind of category, becoming the category defining and category leading brand of the CBD beverage relaxation category, which we have, like, we are winning that and getting but while also building an organization and a supply chain and a business model that is ready to scale at the moment's notice, right? I have
Yeah.
to imagine RX bar, there was like a moment when it just like blew up,
Roller
right? And like,
coaster. Yeah.
yeah. And so that's where we are. And I always think about it, it's like, you want to be the default first choice for a retailer or distributor building out the category, right?
Right.
And that, like, one of my favorite stats is, like, hard seltzer. I think White Claw has something like 50% market share, and when you add White Claw and Truly, it's like 85% market share
It's
in hard
crazy.
seltzer,
Yeah.
right? And it's not because they're the best liquids; it was because they're the category defining brands, right? And
100%.
that becomes the brand that the retailers and the distributors push, and that becomes the default first choice in the consumer's mind. And then it's very hard to take that away, right? Like, Bud Light seltzer, Corona seltzer, all these things, they haven't even really moved the needle all that much,
Yeah.
right? Because of how valuable it is to become that big brand.
Right. 100%. And are you, because of the hemp CBD component, are you able to sell on Amazon?
No, not yet.
No. Okay. So yeah. So it sounds like once some of this happens, you guys are just poised and ready to kind of explode, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's like, those are all the major channels of distribution a lot of CPG brands go after, and you're not able to do it. So if you're
yeah.
crushing it in all these other areas, yeah, that's wild.
Well, it's like I view it as a blessing in disguise. Like, if this would have been ready to scale when we launched, like, well, the company was in my apartment in the East Village. Like, there
Yeah.
was no organization, right? And so it's like given us 19 months to build a supply chain, an organization, an executive team, best in class. It's ready to scale,
Okay.
right? It enabled us to, the brand is, I think our awareness relative to our revenue is probably off the charts, right? Probably, I can't think, there's probably not another example. right? And it's because of, we're digitally native. We have a big Instagram audience. We get a lot of press, but we're not sold to national retailers yet. And so I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing, because when that moment comes, there's already an incredibly amount of entrenched awareness and demand for recess, when we hit the shelves. And they're not going to like put, the national retailer is not going to put this in the back as an experiment. Like, we know CBD works. We
Yeah.
know people want it. Like,
Right.
and the only reason they don't have it is because they couldn't sell it. And so, I'm excited for that day when that comes, and I'm optimistic it's coming soon.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. I was gonna say too. So you guys, I think you probably, and you probably know this, but I feel like also with spending more time, it's kind of what RX did in the early days. Like, we built this cult following by going
Yep.
through our website, going through like the CrossFit B2B channels. It seems like you got, in today's world, I'm seeing a lot of brands that are rushing into retail like really quick. And it's not necessarily a bad decision, but it doesn't allow you to kind of stop and learn your consumer, get that cult following, and then give it to the masses type situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to talk a little more too about speaking of that, is just like your website. So yeah, I was doing research weeks ago when we first talked.
Yep.
I had been on the website, I feel like probably not a year ago, maybe a little 6 months ago. And then when I went on a few weeks ago, I was like, oh, you guys totally overhauled this. It's like a whole new, I don't even want to call your website a website. It's more of like an
World.
experience. It is. I've never seen anything like it. Would you mind explaining a little bit behind that and how you guys went about doing that?
Yeah. Well, look, I think, when coming up with a Recess brand, there's two things. One, I look at Recess as a narrative driven brand. Like, if you think about our messaging and our copy and like how we tell a story, like we're very, very much telling stories, and then creating this like visual world and visual language around it. And I wanted Recess to be able to kind of transport you, like I look at Recess as like a way, it's like a mentality of like dealing with the world around you. And, the fourth point I'd say is like, to connect with creatives, you have to be able to create yourself. Like, creatives understand other creatives. They understand and respect something that was made, in a thoughtful way with like craftsmanship. Right. And so those are like the overarching kind of principles for developing the overall brand. And, ultimately, like the first line on the original site and the first line on the back of the can is like, we canned a feeling. Right. And so ultimately that's what we're selling, is a feeling. And so, but that feeling is not just from the CBD. It's from every interaction you have with the brand. And so our website, like, people like are, I think, completely have, in CPG, I think, have completely underestimated in brand and underinvested in brand. And like, when someone's doing research on you and is looking to understand, like, how does this brand fit into my life? Well, your website is like your website and your Instagram are the number 1, 2 places where that's going to be conveyed. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's completely underinvested in. And so we wanted to kind of create this experience which told the story. Right. And so I look at the website as that. It's really this Recess world. Right. It's very like, it's the copy kind of explains like how Recess fits into your life. We really kind of, I'd say we're the first to really like lean into gradients and like clouds as like this visual language system. Now everyone's doing it. The number of Recess knockoffs, and like, there's a lot.
I'm sure. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, they're gonna have a lot of knockoffs because this is very creative.
It was meant to be like your head in the clouds. Like, that's when you're in flow state, like when you're brainstorming, or, a sunset, like the colors are like a sunset, which was like when I grew up on the beach, like that was my Recess, like watching a sunset almost. Right. And so there's all these like references, I think, to the real world, but it's also, Recess is all about like the merging of like the digital and the physical almost. Right. And so I think we're this, digitally, internet brand with this like offline retail product that's pretty interesting. And so, that was, I think, a rambling a little bit, but I think that, the website's cool and unique. It's just very Recess. It feels natural for us. So it's almost like hard for me to explain it, because it just,
no, for sure.
what's right. But I do think that, since, my advice to other, founders is that brand matters a lot, right? And that consumers today are buying a story, right? They're not just buying a product, and they need to understand, how your brand fits into their life and what you stand for, what you represent. and I don't just mean like politically and social, justice issues. I mean, like, really, like, what do you guys care about? Like, what were you thoughtful about in making this? And I don't think it's enough to just be thoughtful about, the, the liquid or the food, right?
Right.
Like, the brand is important, right? Just look at what brands have gotten big, right? And it's
Yeah.
not just because, it's an important component. And so I think it's really, and I also think, like, the brand strategy of the past of completely not, like, pretending like digital doesn't exist and it's just an afterthought, it's not going to work,
Right.
right? Like, I think a brand has to be architected today with, like, a digital first strategy in mind. And digital first doesn't just mean able to sell through a website or Amazon. That means,
Yeah.
like, how am I going to tell stories online?
Yeah. It's the interaction, right? It's like the interaction piece that I think you're hitting on that a lot of brands just don't do enough of. And it's funny too, the timing to me is interesting. I mean, I know this has been your strategy since you launched because of really the hemp and everything that's involved in your product. But to kind of pivot to COVID, I would think that this has got to have been an eye opener for a lot of brands who, to your point, have underinvested in this space. And now foot traffic's down in stores, purchases are all going online. And if you didn't have that investment either ready to go or already there, number one, you missed out on a lot of people who just switched overnight to a new way of buying, right? And then now that's where a lot of people I think are feeling more comfortable with shopping. So I'm curious for you, how is COVID? Obviously, it's been a horrible thing for everybody, but like for the brand, I'm assuming it actually could have potentially given you guys a lot of new quote unquote foot traffic, but like foot traffic to recess.
Yeah. I mean, look, our tagline is an antidote to modern times. And so,
Yeah.
like, in some ways, the entire thesis of recess was that, like, the world going to get increasingly crazier and crazier as a result of the fact that we live in this transformational moment in history where we're really, like exiting, like, the 20th century, and entering the 21st century,
Yeah.
right? And, like, this digital information age, and that's disruptive across everything, politics, the economy, you know, and the impacts that, frankly, technology's had on our life, right? And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
but with that said, I always say, like, we didn't anticipate a global pandemic and a quarantine and, all these things. But I think what COVID's done is accelerated the future, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I've been saying, like, digitally native for literally 2 years, and everyone thought I was crazy. And I was like, and I think this just really overnight brought the future to the present, right?
Oh,
And just made
that's a
it,
cool way to think about it.
yeah, I think it's just like, it was like an afterthought, and now it's imperative, right? Like,
Right.
you can even see with Pepsi going D2C, like, that's something that was never been done before, right? Because it was just not worthwhile. It was a rounding error, but it's not really a rounding error because it's how you connect with your audience, which is a requirement today. And
Yeah.
so, like, I think there's all these trends that I think COVID has, to summarize, I think there's a lot of trends that COVID has accelerated. The importance of digital, both distribution and brand building. I think the, I think, like, there's certain, like, functional benefit value propositions that just became a lot stronger,
Yeah.
like stress relief and anxiety. A big use case of recess is recess as a substitute for alcohol, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Like, people, they used to, be at their office, go get some drinks after work with their friends, at a bar, and now they're working from home, and, you know, they want something to take the edge off at the end of the day that might not be alcohol. Like, people don't like to drink by themselves or drink at home as much, I think, necessarily. I may
Right.
have a glass of wine, but I think there's a large share that's shifting to, low ABV or no ABV drinks. And we've seen that accelerate during COVID. Our e-commerce business is up, 4x pre-COVID.
Wow.
We launched 3 new flavors during COVID in May that are performing really well. We recently launched subscriptions, and 45% of our orders are subscriptions,
Oh, wow. That's a
which is
lot.
crazy. And it's like, because recess, when it becomes a part of your life, it becomes a daily habit, right?
Yeah.
Once you
I
get
see
used to
that.
drinking a recess, while you're working to focus, or after a workout, or at the end of the day to take the edge off, or before bed, you want to do that every day,
Sure. Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so that's not like, it's different. It's a true, like, functional beverage in people's lives. As well as, like, the thing about recess is everyone asks me, like, who's your competition? I'm like, well, it depends on what time of the day they're drinking it, right? Like
Oh,
if they're drinking it, in the morning instead of a coffee or with their coffee, that's one set of competition. If they're drinking it while working, that might be instead of a LaCroix or a Spindrift or a coffee. If they're drinking it, with lunch, it's a different set of competition. A lot of people use it as a substitute for their, afternoon coffee. A lot of people use it before or after workout. So maybe that's as a substitute for, kombucha or coconut water. In the evening, that's instead
sure.
of
That all makes
alcohol,
sense.
So it's like, why I think, it sounds like an insane thing to say, but I do believe it. Like I ultimately think this category is going to be bigger than energy drinks. And, it's a $20 billion a year category. And it's because there's just more usage occasions and points of distribution where these beverages make sense to be sold. Right. And, no one drinks energy drinks after 5 o'clock unless you're trying to stay up all night. Or we can play it, recess can play it every waking hour of the day.
I was gonna
Right.
say
So,
you can use it literally at any point in the day, right?
yep. Yeah,
And I
exactly.
feel like people are probably more likely to jump in and use this type of product, to your point, throughout the day when things are stressful, whether it's or just want to chill. Like, I mean, there's just so many different use occasions for this type of
Yep.
drink, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so wild. I had one finance question. I know we've been going for a while, so I want to make sure I got it in. I like to ask people in my founder series on here. I think it's just an interesting from a finance lens question is I know when you guys got started, you did do a small seed round. Is if that's correct? What for new? I have a lot of people on here that listen that are either interested in starting a company or they're like thinking about taking an idea and making it into a business. What is your suggestion or advice now that you've gone through it on bootstrapping versus raising some money, or like what are the reasons you went down the raising route? Just kind of
Yeah.
like a general understanding of like your thought and process of doing that for Recess.
It's a really good question. Look, I think it's really important to be like really honest with like the opportunity, right? Like I really believed it. I was like, this is an opportunity that's going to be as big as Red Bull. And it didn't even exist yet. It was an idea.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not going to build Red Bull bootstrapping it. Right. And I even think beverage in particular is notoriously expensive, right? Because you need, if you're going DSD beverage, these products are not just showing up on the shelves in the independent class of trade, right? So you have
Right.
massive sales team, massive field marketing team, massive, brand awareness required to do it. And so, for us, like I recognize early days that if, I really want to take a shot at doing this, like that's going to require capital.
Okay.
Right. And I
Yep.
did come from Silicon Valley and like a lot of friends are VCs. So like I was always interested in that world. Right. And so I was familiar, with how it worked.
Okay.
But what I would say for other entrepreneurs so for other entrepreneurs is really recognize about like where is what is the opportunity and what does it look like. I think this one was one where I was able to say in a PowerPoint, like, here's why I think this is going to work. Right. And it's like a pretty logical one.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's so many different, CPG ideas, which are, pretty niche, right? Like they just are, right? And it's like, I don't know how big the market's going to get. And so I think they require a little more validation. And so, for Recess, I basically did self-fund it until we got to a point where I could put final label, initial formula, and like a go-to-market plan down in front of someone, right? So it was not just an idea, but it was something you could taste. It was something you could look at. And I was like, this is how we're going to launch. Like you're funding the launch, right?
Right.
So I think that's important. I think I don't think you can just like, I think it's a terrible idea to raise money for an idea.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it's bootstrapping it for as long as possible should always be the goal. And then I just think I think it's fair. It's like there are bigger ideas and there are some really, really big ideas and there's some ideas that are smaller and that's
Yeah.
okay. But
Yeah.
just like recognize that and just, understand that it means two different things. Because the second you start, taking a lot of money from investors, like you're playing a different game, right? It's not the
Definitely.
same game and it's just different, right? And it has trade-offs, right? You're taking dilution, you're giving up control, you're bringing other people with, opinions into the company that have a vested interest, right? Like
Right.
a lot of my job is managing investors and, positioning the company for future capital and things like that. And so you just got to be, I think it's recognize that once you go down that path, there's a different set of expectations around like making progress, growth, like, thinking big. I do think people can think bigger in the CPG industry. I don't think
Okay.
people
Yeah.
think big enough. Like, and I think I bring kind of a Silicon Valley mentality to CPG around, building businesses, thinking for the long term, watching, planting a bunch of seeds and watching them all kind of grow, thinking in this like kind of flywheel dynamic. I do think
Okay.
Silicon Valley is like a way of thinking about building businesses that don't just apply to technology.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's probably something that really hasn't happened too many times in the CPG space so far. Um, we've been going for a while, so I don't want to take too much of your time. I had a couple last questions that I wanted to ask you, Ben. One being, I like to ask all of my people on my founder series this. Do you, as an entrepreneur, have any books or like podcasts or anything that you like go to that you would suggest to, anyone if you had one to pick from? So like a book, podcast, something to learn.
So my favorite book is for entrepreneurs is Shoe Dogs, which is around the founding of Nike and
Oh
kind of
yeah.
Phil Knight's story. And, that was, it took like 20, 30 years. We think of Nike as what it is today, but, really took 20, 30 years to even get to that point. Right. And just like the persistence required and like the belief he had in the opportunity was super inspiring. And I think really does convey the entrepreneurial journey well. One of my favorite, newsletters is from this guy, Webb Smith, called 2PML. And he writes about like, the digitally native brand space, the direct to consumer space, and kind of the new models that are emerging. And I think they apply to everything. Right. And he has this concept of, linear commerce, which is, basically his thesis was, all consumer brands are going to effectively become media companies because you need to generate like this kind of earned media strategy, because the idea that you're just going to build a brand doing paid media exclusively is done.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I'd encourage people to read that, because no matter what your industry is, I do think that is like a meta thought that's, applying. Podcasts. I really like this podcast, Invest Like the Best, which is, it was run by this finance guy, but he brings on entrepreneurs and investors, and really good interview, really thoughtful conversation. And that's how I learned. Like I learned that, like I swear I didn't learn a single thing in business school that
I say the
applies to
same thing.
recess. Like completely, I wouldn't have even gone to college in retrospect. But I think you can learn so much just on YouTube, Twitter, just podcasts, right? Just like listening to other people that have gone through what you're going to go through is really helpful. And you start to like pattern match and, those are a couple of things I found valuable.
Yeah, love those. Thank you. And then the other one I like to ask is, what do you use as far as a tool to like, I mean, you're a CEO and you're running a business and you're on, different boards and you're doing lots of stuff. What do you use to like track all of your tasks and to-dos, or do you notebook it? Do you have an app you like, or is it all over the place like most of us?
It's pretty all over the place. I'm terrible. Like I'm really not great. To be honest, I'm working on it, but like I'm naturally kind of a creative. And so it's more, but I've gotten to a point where, I think to get, to running a business and I have a million ideas and just organizing them is very important. Right. And so it's something I'm working on. I started to use Notion, pretty good with my calendar in terms of, putting stuff in that. I have an assistant, which is really, I find to be really helpful for me, because it allows me to get some stuff off my plate. And she really gives me the time to think, right, about, what our strategy is. Because I think so often, like your job as a CEO is, it's really about making the important making the right important decisions, right? And it's like I think you look back in a year and there's like, so often it's like only a few decisions that really are the meaningful ones. Like
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
going to do this launch, we're going to invest in this, we're going to hire this person. And if you're so like busy, um, and have no time to think, I think you make bad decisions, right? And so a
That
lot of my
totally makes
time is
sense.
spent, thinking, to be honest.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. That's great. Um, I think the thinking piece, that's one that I don't hear probably enough people say. I think it's true. We get very stuck in just the like tasks and
Yeah.
don't just stop and have time to think. That's such a great call out.
Yep.
And then lastly, but most importantly, how do people try, what's your suggestion on people trying Recess? And then how do
Yeah.
people get a hold of you if they have any other questions or want to learn more about the brand?
Yeah. So go to takearecess.com, and you can order a sampler. You can order all the kind of each of our flavors, and we offer free shipping. And we're, I believe, running a summer sale right now. We have, retail distribution in kind of, the major markets are New York, LA, Chicago, Austin, primarily a little in the Bay Area, but that's, ramping up. And you can find me on Instagram or Twitter. My handle is BWITTE on Instagram, and Ben Witte on Twitter. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ben. I will add the link to the show notes and I'll add all that in the show notes as well. And can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. It was a pleasure getting to know you and meet you and learn more about Recess.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ben. Hope you have a great rest of your day and we'll talk soon.
Cool. Take care.
Awesome.